Welcome back. Lisa Miller is a consumer marketing strategist. In other words, she understands what's going on out there when it comes to service industry, the economy, everything that goes with it. Apparently, if you look at it, customers are getting frustrated. They're really getting frustrated, and a lot of that has to do with the lack of employees. Lisa, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Thanks for having me today.
Give me your assessment of what's going on out there, for example, in the service industry.
Definitely. So thanks for having me on. And I've been tracking the COVID consumer sentiment since last year. And what we've seen is obviously we can see it every day. The pent up demand is just there. More crowds are happening and people are excited to get back to it. But what's happening, the consequence of that is people are getting frustrated. There's definitely a labor shortage at restaurants. And I've seen the frustration double for restaurants about being short-staffed just since February. And about 43% of Americans are just really kind of irritated that the service just isn't that good.
So have you been able to talk to the employers as to why? I've been in a restaurant where the employer said, the restaurateur, the owner said, you know what? This is all about the fact that the government is paying too much in unemployment. There's no incentive for those workers to come back to work. Is that true?
There's lots of ideas on that, and absolutely the one that you just mentioned about it. Sometimes if you have children at home and you're in the service business, it's cheaper, it's better to stay home than having to pay childcare. There's 24 states that are going to be repealing that in the coming weeks, so that will help. But the other thing is, you might have seen there's just some bad customer behavior out there too, right? You see where, the servers just aren't treated that nicely. So you combine that with, they may make more money staying home, but then, they're just not enjoying their job. So there's a couple of different things. What the anticipation though, is that with school coming back in the fall, children are going to be back in school. The unemployment benefits are going to probably be waning. So hopefully it's definitely a speed bump right now, but hopefully, by fall, maybe things might settle back down.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because people are creatures of habit. I know I am. You can set your clock by certain things I do during the day. For many years, some of these workers have gotten up. They knew exactly where they were going to work. They knew exactly what they were going to do. And for the past year, that wasn't the case. Has that changed things forever? Have they found out that there's a whole nother world out there and they're not reliant on it?
Without a doubt. The National Restaurant Association basically published that even like 3 million restaurant jobs were lost when COVID started. Today, there's still a shortage of 1.7 million jobs, and even just restaurant jobs, 1.7 million. And even just in March, there were over 1 million job postings for restaurants. So the jobs are there. It's that they're just opting out to do other things. And it's going to take, you've seen how restaurants are now having to do bonuses, even high-end restaurants like, Wolfgang Puck, in those restaurants, you make a ton of money. I mean, you can make 6 figures at one of those restaurants. They're still having trouble getting servers. So it's really just an industry-wide situation. And to answer your question, yes, the industry is going to be very different of retention. How do you get new talent? It's not going to go back.
So the way much of what you're describing, that industry pays their workers, oftentimes is based upon tips. You're allowed to pay this much versus what the rest of society has to pay, because that server has the opportunity to make that much based upon tips. Is that going to change? Are we going to, does money solve this? Are they going to have to sit there and say, look, we've got to come to the realization that if we want Joel back to our restaurant to be a bartender, to be a server, we're going to have to pay him more?
That's the question that restaurants are grappling with right now. And the challenge is you just described it, is that if you're getting a low hourly wage, but then the tips are really how you make your money. Let's say, for example, if you make $4 an hour plus tips and you end up making $20 an hour. If then the minimum wage gets to $15, then the reality of it is, and this is a pretty universal opinion, prices are going to have to go up at restaurants. And that's what they're really scared of. At 66%, 2/3 of Americans are very concerned that prices at restaurants aren't going to be affordable, because you can't offer the same thing today and then tomorrow change, like, charge a whole lot more and it's be the same thing. So that's really the tension that's happening today in the restaurant industry.
Well, let me give you an example, and do not judge my state by the numbers I'm about to give you. Okay,
Okay.
it's where we live. We raise beef here, but I went out the other night with some friends to have a steak where I've eaten many, many times before, and I had a $24 ribeye many, many times before, and I looked at the menu this time, and it was $32. And I went there to have that steak, and you know what I did? I sat back in my chair, and I had a $32 steak because I still wanted that steak. Now, that might be my life situation. I can afford the $32, at least for today. In the media industry, you get fired easy. But the point I'm trying to make is, if they raise the price to the consumer, will they support that? Well, people do what I did, which is say, I want to buy that steak.
Yeah, and the craveability of certain food items, and I'm from Texas, so I can definitely relate to the beef country. And the issue will become, though, Joel, is that affordability and how frequently it can go. So that's really what can happen. So yeah, you might go ahead and splurge on that $32 steak that night because you craved it and you went there specifically for it. But the reality of it is, how does that pan out to restaurant frequency? So if you might choose to go 3 times and now you're going to go once, and that's what's really hard is if you're sitting there and you're already there, but it's the sticker shock, like you just described. It's a sticker shock when that prices go up. And part of what's driving that problem is the supply chain. The restaurant workers themselves, that's in a shortage of staff, but also in the manufacturing facilities, the people driving the trucks, that shortage of labor is up and down the supply chain. So that's also contributing to why that steak is now $32.
Well, how big of a factor is it that we've learned how to cook again? You take my wife and I, we've had our kids raised for quite some time. My daughter's 37 and the other one's 36. So it's just been our two in the house for a long time now. We never ate at home. If we did eat at home, we never ate together. We never had the same. And in terms of life schedule, I come home at this hour, she comes home at that hour. So we never sat down to a meal except maybe once a week. We do now. We do sometimes now. We did last night. And so is that become something that restaurants should fear? The fact that people like Sue and I know how to cook again.
And I actually been measuring that in the survey because there were 2 questions I wanted to understand. I wanted to measure, like, number 1, are people coming back to cooking? But number 2, are they getting tired of it a year later, right? Because we've been cooking more at home. And what the data is actually showing is that there's just a different social experience of somebody else doing the cooking for you. And I asked a question about, can you have that same experience, cooking at home versus eating in a restaurant? And there's something special about the experience that you can't get at home. So the tension again between that is, if you're going to have somebody do the cooking for you and going to a restaurant, then you want that good experience. And you have to have staff to have that experience. But at the end of the day, I don't think the restaurants don't have to worry about, people being so in love with cooking that they're not going to go out to eat.
Okay. One more quick one. With the short time we have, does this change? Does anything, in your opinion, do we get back to normal?
The biggest thing, I think, there's 2 things I'd want to tell everybody. One, if you go out to eat, you're going to expect to probably have some delays. But for restaurant owners, what they really need to do is balance that. Lead with joy is what I call it, and deliver that exceptional experience. But you have to still reassure with safety, because we can't give up. Consumers are still wanting to see those visible safety measures happening, like cleanliness, trying to social distance. So operators need to be more in tune with that maybe than even a year ago. So those are the 2 things: lead with joy and reassure with safety.
Okay. And I won't even bring up which one of us cooks better between Sue and I, because I could just get in trouble for that. Lisa, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.